Morning. Hope all of you are well. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Beitzah Daf Chav Zayin. We're going to go all the way to the last word on the page, a little bit further, David, than that. Short Mishnah and Gemara, but all the way to the last page is the next Lada Rav Moshe. It's very, very close to Moshe Shapir Daf. Daf Chav Ches ends a line from the bottom. The Mishnah is very close. Yesterday we were having a discussion about whether or not there's such a thing as muksa for only part of Shabbos. The Gemara presented two opinions. Yes, there is such a thing. Yesh muksa l'chasi Shabbos, and another shita, ein muksa l'chasi Shabbos. We were trying to prove one of the shitas. So the Gemara on the very last line of Kavav Days finds a case that is semi-similar to what we were talking about, and we have to see if the comparability of this case to our case of yesh mechitza or ein mechitza l'chasi Shabbos is enough to learn from. So the Gemara says Tashma. Normally, when we see the word Tashma, we typically see a Beitzah or to set to something from the Tanaim. Yet here we don't. It's an anomaly. It's not normal. Something should pick up on this. Nevertheless, Tashma bottom of Chavav B'Beis. Sorry, Amar Reb Zera. Tashma Bipulin V'Adashim. We could come and learn. What? You could still say that, but there's no Beitzah even after that. That's for sure what's happening. It's not crazy in content, but it's crazy in frequency. You don't see this. Usually Tashma is usually a Beitzah. It's not anomalous. It's not. It doesn't mean it isn't a raya. It is. That's what the Gemara is trying to do. You're correct in content. In structure, it's not what the Gemara does. It's almost always right. Anyways, we're going to learn from Kulin Va'adashim. These are our beans and lentils. Kulin Va'adashim. When they're still raw, chazu lakus. So this is a language we see throughout Shas. Foods that are raw, that are being chewed on. So fine. So they're chewing on the food. Then shadinhu. If you throw it b'kteru, you throw it in a pot and you then eat the food. You can't eat it while it's in a boiling pot, obviously. So it seems to be that it's allowed and then it's not allowed. And then at the top of Kav Zayin and Aleph, and then once it finishes cooking, all is well. So we see available, unavailable, followed by available. So if that's true, maybe we can compare this case to our sugya of yesh mechitza l'chati Shabbos or ein mechitza l'chati Shabbos. Because that was the case that we were discussing. Put the figs on the roof, they were fine before Shabbos. Then it rained and they were not fine. And now they're fine again when they dried out when the sun came out. So can we compare these cases? The Gemara says, absolutely not. Amar le'abaye, u'letamech, according to your svara, tikshilach kederos de'alma. Forget about this case. All cases in which there would be food that is boiling, we would call that muksa. Tastam kederos de'alma bein hashmashas roschosein. This is what we do. We boil our soup up until shkia, up until candlelighting, I should say, and then we turn it off. It's boiling hot, way beyond yad, so let us go. We've actually had children spill soup on them with burns. It's extremely hot. So says the Gemara, are we going to treat that as muksa? And then it's muksa that you can eat from it again. That's crazy. You can't just, that's not muksa. That's not what muksa means. Ella says the Gemara, the case that we tried to bring from Poland Va'adashim, not a case that we can learn. Why not? 4 lines down on Chav Zayin. Gamru, Adam, Lo Kami Baila. When we're talking about something that is man-made, namely the Kulin and Adashim, they put it into a pot, they're chewing it on their own. That's not what we're discussing. Where's our case? When something is happening outside of our control and in the power of, so you put the figs up on the roof to dry, and then it starts raining. You don't control the rain. We can only compare to the world of yesh muksa l'chati Shabbos or ein muksa l'chati Shabbos. So therefore, we cannot learn from the case of Kulam Va'adashim to our case of yesh mechitza or ein mechitza. Again, we know how we paskin. We do paskin ein mechitza l'chati Shabbos, that we don't hold up like these interruptions. There's no such thing, whatever the status is by shkia, it is. But we did try to learn from here, and it was a failed attempt. 6-7 lines down, Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya. What a big difference with the letter hey. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya was the grandchild of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So he was already in the times of the Amoraim. Yehuda Nasi died around the year 220. So if this is his grandkid, let's assume that he lived around 220, 230, whatever it was. It's not, he was not considered a Tana in a formal way. Anyways, Havalei Hahu Bukhra. He had a Bechor. And as we started learning yesterday, a Bechor, even Bisman Hazeh, it's born B'Kedusha. It's Kedusha Me'elam. And if you shecht an animal that is a Bechor that has Kedusha, Bisman Hazeh, so that's Kachim Bachut, that's Shchitas Kachim Bachut, and you're Chayav Kares for that. Huge punishment. I, in the first Mishnah Maseches Krisus, not allowed. So it says the Gemara, he had this Bechor. Shadre the Kameh de Ravami, and he sent the animal in front of Ravami. Ravami was an expert in checking for movement. The only way you can shech the Bechor Bisman Hazeh is if the animal has a mum. So he was hoping the animal would have a mum. So then Savar, Ravami said, I can't check it. Delo lemechazia. He says, I don't check animals on Yom Tov. I don't do that. Right? He held that it was prohibited. Yesterday I mentioned, based on Rashi, that it's possible that this is comparable to a bezdin functioning on Shabbos or Yom Tov, which is not allowed. So Ravami says, we don't check movement on Yom Tov. Amar le Rav Zerika, the Item Rav Yirmiyah, either Rav Zerika or Rav Yirmiyah says, Rav Yehuda v'Rav Shimon, as a general rule, when we have a machlokas Rav Yehuda v'Rav Shimon, halacha Rav Yehuda. Now this is strange and for a whole host of reasons. First of all, it's not true because we paskin not like that in regards to Rav Shimon and Mistaber. We paskin like Rav Shimon. It's not always like Rav Yehuda, and we'll see why that's true in a minute. But the Gemara posits that maybe we should assume that the halacha should be like Rav Yehuda. What did Rav Yehuda say in our Mishnah? Rav Yehuda said in our Mishnah, if you turn back a page to Chav Ham, based on the very bottom line, it says there, Rav Yehuda Omer Yered Mumcha v'Yerayef. Rav Yehuda was of the opinion that it's mutter. So you, Rav Ami, you want to say that Rav Ami? Rav Ami. You, Rav Ami, want to say, hey, hold on one second. How can you say that we follow? How can you say that we don't allow for checking? That's the shita of Rav Shimon, but we should be holding like Rav Yehuda. Says the Gemara, Hadar Shadre the Kameh de Rav Yitzchak Nafla. So, anyways, Rav Ami wasn't willing, even with that argument. Rav Ami says, and then this person, Rav Yehuda Nasiya, said, you know what? Let me bring it to another Rav. Shadre the Kameh de Rav Yitzchak Nafla. So he brought the animal to another. What's going on? You're shopping for kulas? Not shopping for kulas. He held Ladina. What?
Looking for a psak.
You were looking for a psak, and this person wasn't looking at it, but it's a little bit more than that, which is that he held it's mutter. Yehuda Nasiya held that it's mutter for someone to look for movement on Shabbos. So when he found out from Rav Ami that Rav Ami held like Rav Shimon that you're not allowed to check for movement, he's like, I don't paskin like that. I'm not shopping for kulas. I'm going to a Rav who holds like me. So that's why you have to know. It's like a bit of a chachma here to go ask this shaila to another person. Anyways, he went to Rav Yitzchak Nafka. He too, Rav Yitzchak Nafka, savar delo lemechazia. He doesn't look either. So Amar le Rav Yirmiyah v'Item Rav Zerika. I don't understand again. Same question again. Rav Yehuda v'Rav Shimon halacha Rav Yehuda. It should be that when we have a machlokas, as we do in our Mishnah on the bottom of Chav Ham base, as to whether or not we are allowed to check for movement on Yom Tov, we should paskin like Rav Shimon, who is lenient, and not. We should paskin like Rav Yehuda, who is lenient, and not like Rav Shimon. So Amar le Rabbi Abba, I don't understand. My taima lo shivaktinu b'Rabbanan lememad uvda ki Rav Shimon. What is going on here? Why do you think that we should hold like Rav Shimon? Why would you assume that that's the case, that we should hold like Rav Shimon in this case, that we should be lenient? Amar le ve'atma b'yadech. What source do you have? Amar le, first of the long lines on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, Hachi Amar Reb Zera, halacha ki Reb Shimon, because Reb Zera paskins not like the general rule. There is a general rule quoted throughout Shas that Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda, halacha ki Reb Shimon. But Reb Zera in this area paskins like Reb Shimon, and that means that there should be no checking of movement on Shabbos. It says the Gemara, Amar Mandahu, there was a particular person, a nameless person, we don't know who he was in the base medrash, and he says, Azki, I want to merit the Asik Lahasam and go up to Eretz Yisrael. We should all feel that way. The Agmar the Shmaisam Pume Demara. And I want to learn this sugya from the mouth of my master, from the mouth of Reb Zera. And then he finally got on a flight and he went. He Salik Lahasam and he went to Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechel Reb Zera. Then he went and he found Reb Zera, from whom we should be expecting to hear that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that you're not allowed to check for movement on Shabbos. 1/3 of the way down, 3 lines into the wide lines. Amar Le. So the Talmud, this is a random person whose name we don't know. Amar Mar. He says to Reb Zera, halacha ki Reb Shimon, did you in fact say that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that you're not allowed to check? Amar le, Reb Zera says, lo, that's not even what I said. All I said, I wasn't paskening. All I said was, ana mistabra amre. I was saying, it makes sense. I'm not paskening a shiur. We're talking and learning. This is sometimes what we do when we're learning Gemara. Based on the conclusion of the Gemara, it makes sense to say X. Is it psak halacha mefurish and shulchan aruch? No, not necessarily. Often, yeah, because the Gemara is the extraction point for halacha. But here the Gemara says, no, Reb Zera was only mistabra. Midikatani b'masnisin. Where did Reb Zera get his mistabra from? That it's logical to paskin like Reb Shimon that we don't check for mumen on Shabbos, because our Mishnah writes. What does our Mishnah say? That Reb Shimon Omer called she'ein mumar nikar mibe'od yom, that if a mum is not nikar from before Yom Tov begins, then ein zeh mina muchan, then it's not muchan. What does that mean? It's not muchan. It means we can't even check. And as well, the Katani la Beitzah b'lashon chachamim, the Beitzah has similar language as well. Shema mina mistabra kavosei. Therefore, it's logical to assume, like Reb Zera, that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that one is not allowed to check, and that explains why both Rav Ami and Rav, who was the second one, Rav Ami and I can't find it. And Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, that the two of them hold that we should not check, because we hold like Rav Zera, who said that it was mistaber to hold like Rav Shimon, that there is no checking of mumen. My have Allah, halfway down on the daf, Chavzayin Amid Aleph, how do we paskin? Amar Rav Yosef Tashmat the Talia Ba'ashle Rav Rave. This machlokas is dependent on the great trees. It's dependent on the great rabbis. Amar Rav Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Amar Rav Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rebbe Mishum Kala Kadosh Yerushalayim. Wow, that's a chain of people. So we have from this remarkable collection of Amoraim and Tanaim. Rav Yeshua ben Levi was a well-known Amora, and he's going back to Rav Yossi ben Shaul and to Rebbe, and Rebbe back to the Kala Kadosh Yerushalayim. And Rav Shimon and the Chavei Rav Amru, they all said halacha k'Reb Meir. They all said the halacha is like Reb Meir. We don't know what Reb Meir says yet, but we will learn what he says shortly. But first, the Gemara interjects with a question. Amru, how can these people speak about the shita of Reb Shimon? But they were way older. That doesn't make sense. How can that be? Ella, it must be that what were they talking about? The shita of Reb Meir Amru, that they were speaking about the opinion of Reb Meir. It's not what's Reb Meir's opinion. Let's say that a shchita was done on a bechor. We know that the only shchita of a bechor can be done when we know that there's a mum, because the shchita of a bechor without a mum is an isser d'oraisa in your chayv kares. It says the Gemara, if a person shechts a bechor and they find the mum only afterwards, that's the machlokas. Do we assume the mum was there from before? Yes or no? That's a machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda matir, Reb Meir Omer hol v'mishkan shelo al pi mum che'asar. Rabbi Yehuda says no problem. We can assume that because immediately after shchita we see a mum, so therefore we can assume that the mum was there before the shchita took place, and therefore the shchita of this before, although you should have checked before, but halacha l'maisa it should be considered still appropriate. Rav Meir says no, you did not do the shchita with a mumcha. The mumcha did not check, and therefore also you're not allowed to eat this. So let's see. The Gemara then says something very interesting. Alma. We're 2/3 of the way down, about 15 lines from the bottom of the page. Alma, it appears from here, Kasava Reb Meir, that Re'iyas Bechor Lam Ki Re'iyas Treifa, that looking at a Bechor, checking for mumen for a Bechor is different than checking for Treifos. If you go to a Schlachthaus and they're going to check for Treifos, when do they check the lungs? After the lungs have been removed from the body after Shchita. You're not checking beforehand with an ultrasound and nothing. You check for treifas afterward. That's the Gemara's distinction. Re'iyas bechor mechayim. When you're checking for blemishes for a bechor in order to determine if you can shech them, that can only happen when they're alive, according to Reb Meir. Re'iyas treifa. But when we're looking for the common treifos that would invalidate the kashrus of an animal, a hole in the stomach, a sircha in the lungs, a hole in the skull, whatever they are, re'iyas treifa la'achar shchita. And then what can we learn from there? Umina, and this is where we get to the heart of Rav Meir. Umina re'iyas treifa fi Yom Tov. There you can check for treifas even on Yom Tov, because we have to determine if you're allowed to eat the animal after it's shechted. But re'iyas bechor me erev Yom Tov, and that's the shita of Rav Meir. That when are you allowed to check a bechor? Only before the shechita takes place, and that can only happen on erev Yom Tov. But you're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov. Amar le Abaye. Atu Hasam, Viro and Mumin Pligi. You think that the Machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir, that's in this brisa that we just saw, 2/3 of the way down, about Rav Meir in a Mishnah actually, that Machlokas is not about Rowan, the Knasa Pligi. It's talking about the slap on the wrist, whether or not there is a slap on the wrist for doing the shchita of a bechor without first checking for movement. Says the Gemara, the Amar Rabba Bar Barchana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bedukin Shebe'ayin. If there was a problem with one of the eyes of the animal, with cataracts, so says the Gemara, the halacha is, if you see a cataract in an animal after it was shechted by a bechor, we instantly say that that must have taken place before, because once an animal dies through shechita, through any way, but certainly through shechita, its eyes will quickly change. And therefore, it can have an appearance of cataracts even afterwards. And therefore, when it comes to the psul of cataracts for an animal, and what's the machlokas? The machlokas is kipligi b'mumin shebeguf. Do we make a comparison between a flaw in the body, a mum in the body, to a flaw in the eyes, to the cataracts? Reb Meir Savar, Reb Meir was of the opinion, Gazrina and mumin shebeguf atu mumin shebe'ayin. Reb Meir said, we look at a mum in the body and say, just like by the eye, we're not allowed to look at the cataracts afterwards and say, hey, it probably was fine before. Therefore, we say the same thing by mum and shebeguf. If the animal has a split lip, so we would therefore assume that just like we fear that the cataracts existed before, we also fear that the split lip existed before. So that's Rav Meir. He's the one who goes there, and that's why he writes in the Mishnah that that because you didn't have a mumcha check the animal, it's aser. However, 6-7 lines from the bottom, Rabbi Yehuda Savar Lo Gazrina. That's the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir, but it's not about Rowan. It's not about whether or not we allow the person to check. It's only the scope of the gzeira of what we say after you find a mum once an animal's already shechted. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Masnis and Nami Teka. Our Mishnah implies that in fact this machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Meir is about the knas. How do we know? Diktani. What does the Beitzah write? Rav Meir Omer Hol v'nishchat shelo pi mumche aser. Because you didn't have a mumche, therefore it's aser. That's the language of a knas. Shmami na knasahu dekakani shmami. And therefore the Gemara has a hard time finding the source with Rav Meir, because Rav Meir's source wasn't about rowing. Rav Meir's source wasn't about whether or not we allow for a dayan to check the mum and anyot. If it was only about whether or not we extend our concern of cataracts in an animal as a mum after shchita to before shchita, whether or not we extend that same concern to mum and shebeguf. The Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, tells a little bit of a story. Ami Vardina is an interesting name. Take a look at Rashi. Vardina, Verd is a rose. Nahaya. Al Shem Vradim Haya Nikra. It's so beautiful. They compared him to a rose. I don't know that that's what I would want to be compared to had I been such an attractive individual. But it says Rashi, Vardina. It's probably a little more practical that instead of putting him in GQ magazine, we're just saying he's from the city of Vardina, Kidamrin and Be'ervin, Shenikra, Me'anshe Vardina Va'anashim Tzikanin Bitsari Ayin Bimamonan Haifai. So he's either good looking or he's from that city. Anyways, 3 lines from the bottom. Ami Vardina Chazi Bukhra de Beinisia Hava. He was the checker of the Bukhra, of the Bechoros of the Beinisia. The Yoma Tava Lo Hava Chazi. And he, like the others, like the Shita of Reb Shimon and like the presumed Shita of Rav Meir, though it's a little hard to tell, they didn't check these animals for Mumin on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Asu v'amru la Rabbi Ami. So they went and they said to Rabbi Ami, this guy's not checking Mumin. This is his one job. He's not checking Mumin on Yom Tov. So of course we know Rabbi Ami. We saw his Shita already. Amar lehu shapir ka'avi delochaz. He's doing a perfect job. You should not be checking. It says the Gemara, but Rabbi Ami, you yourself check. Oh, well, how's that so 80? Is it true that you're not supposed to check? Rabbi Ami gufei chazi. He would look at Mumin on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, absolutely not. You don't understand what's happening. Rav Ami ki chazi me esmol hava chazi. The only time Rav Ami would check was before Yom Tov. Turning to the top of Chav Zayin and the base, we'll be heading to the last word on the page. Let's continue. Says the Gemara, Uve Yom Tov, but on Yom Tov, what would Ravami do? He wouldn't check animals, but he would grill the owner of the animal because there was a Yetzer Hara to find a mum on a Bechor. Why? Because the only way you can shech the Bechor is if it has a mum. Because if a Bechor doesn't have a mum, then it's Kodshim, and Kodshim Bachutz is Onish Kares. So people were looking for it. So there was a custom at that time, and it probably should still exist now, that if a person has a Bechor, that they should be grilled. Did you intentionally put a mum here? What's going on? So B'Yom Tov, Shiyule Kameshayel, they would ask him questions. Hey, how did this come about? Did you do this on purpose? Did you take a little scalpel and then you cut the animal's lips so that it would be considered to be a mum, and therefore you can shecht it? So it says the Gemara, Kiha dehahu gavre. There was a particular person. To Aisi Bukhra Lakame de Rava. He brought a Bechor in front of Rava. Apanya Demala Yom Tov. On Erev Yom Tov, he brought it right as it was turning to the. We just said this in the Ela. Kipana Hayom. We're getting to the end of the day. Apanya was toward the afternoon of Erev Yom Tov. Yosef Rava v'Kachai Freshi. He was washing his hair. It's a strange time to ask someone a shaila. But okay, they asked him a shaila. So Dali Eine, he kind of raised his eyes. V'Chazi Lemume. He saw that the animal had a mum. Amar Le'Zilha Idna, go now. V'Salamachar, come back on this. I'm showering. Come back later. This was Erev Yontif, which means he's coming back on Yontif, which means that we now have a precedent of people doing the interrogation piece on Yontif, of asking, how did this mum come about? That next day, Ki Asa Lamachar, when the Balabayas came back with this Bechor, Amar Le, Rava said to him, Heichi Hava Uvda, what happened with this particular animal? So the Gemara says, 6 lines down on Chav Zayin and the base, Amar Le, he said to Rava, Avashaj and Sari Bach Gisa Dehutza. There was barley seeds on the far side of the fence. And my animal was on this side of the fence. He was hungry. There was a little bit of a hole in the fence about the size of his head. Ayo Reshe. So he put his head through the fence. Uparte Hutza Lisfase. And the fence cut his lip. And that's how he got the mum. Amar Le Dilma Ad Garam Tole. You, because you have a Yetzer Hara that your Bechor should have a mum so you can shech it. So maybe we should say that you did something wrong. So says the Gemara, not correct. Amar Leilo. He says, no, I was yashar about it. Umina Timra, how do we know the Grama Aser? How do we know that causing a mum in a Bechor is problematic? Let's think about that. Who cares? Go take a knife and just cut the animal's lip. What's the difference? Says the Gemara, it's not allowed. How do we know? And this will bring us to the first Mishnah on the page. The Tanya. The Beitzah writes, Mum lo yihyabo. That's a pasuk in Chumash. Let's read the whole pasuk. A person is going to bring a shlamim to a Kadosh Baruch Hu as a neder or as an adava, as a voluntary offering. From large animals or small. Tamim yihyeh. It needs to be an unblemished animal. Leratzon. Kol mum lo yihyabo. So it says, Kol mum lo yihyabo. So it says the pasuk back in the Gemara. We're 12 lines down. The Tanya, how do we know that inducing a mum is not allowed? The pasuk says, Mum lo yihyabo. So from the words mum lo yihyabo, all I know is that the animal has to be a tamim. And therefore, shelo yavi batzeko dvela, that you shouldn't take some sweet food, some dough or some cake and put it v'aniach al gabe ha'ozen kadesh yavo akela v'yitlenu. Wow. That is a real roundabout way to create a mum. You put some honey on the ear of the dog, on the ear of this animal, and the dog just lunges at it and bites. Oh, nebuch, it's a mum, and my bechor can now be shechted. How do we know we're not allowed to do that? Talmud Omar, kol mum. The pasuk has the word kol. What does kol mum imply? Omar mum, the Torah said mum, but Omar kol mum. We added the word kol. And the word kol comes to teach us that when it comes to a bechor, an animal that can only be shechted with a mum, that you are not allowed to be the one who induces the mum. It's a pasuk in Chumash, and seemingly it's a psul deoraisa based on the way the Gemara presents. It seems like it's a pasuk in Chumash. That brings us to the next Mishnah. No. I mean, the owner had said it was not his fault. It's where the barley was, and when he came to check on his animal's lip was bleeding, and that's a psul. The person was, if he's honest, he could lie. But it's probably a bad idea to lie to Rava. I would imagine he'd figure it out. We know when people are lying typically or often. Yeah, there's other facial expressions as well. Unmasking the Face. It's a book by Paul Ekman.
teaches you how to read people's faces. Fascinating book. Left it on an airplane about 10 years ago.
Says the Gemara in a new Mishnah, Behema Shemesa, if there's an animal that dies on Yom Tov, Lo Yezizena Mimakoma, it has the status of Muksa, and you cannot move it. We'll see in a minute that that's not so simple. Umaisa, there was a story where this took place with Shalu Servitarfon, and they asked him this, and that's what he paskin. And then as well, the Gemara seems to make a comparison between an animal that dies and there is a person whose chala became tamei, it's truma, becomes tamei, Nita touched it, whatever it was. The nichnas the beis hamedrash shall they asked Shaila v'amru lo yizize mimakoma muksa, not allowed. So we see in our Mishnah that if an animal dies, that it automatically becomes muksa. But that's really not simple because we learned already in this Masechta, I believe, and if not here, then elsewhere, that that's not true. That lema, maybe we should say lema tznan stama, that the anonymous, because there's no names in our Mishnah in regards to the Shita itself. They did ask Rabbi Tarfo, but the Baal Shita who wrote Behema Shemesa Lo Yezizenim Mimakoma, we don't know his name. Lema tznan stama, that this Stam Mishnah is the Loka Reb Shimon. Why is our Mishnah the Loka Reb Shimon? This should ring a bell. Ditnan, the Mishnah writes just about halfway down on Chav Zayin and the Beis. The Mishnah writes, Reb Shimon Omer Mechad Chenesadun Blun Lifnei Behema. You're allowed to cut a vegetable that's raw. It's inedible to you. You're allowed to cut a pumpkin, whatever it is that's raw, and feed it to an animal. And then check out these words. Ves hanevela lifnei haklavim. And a nevela, that you can also cut. Our Mishnah says, Lo Yezize Mimakoma. Our Mishnah says that with an animal that dies, that you're not allowed to move it. Yet Reb Shimon seems to say that you can cut a nevela and give it to the dogs, no problem. So therefore, maybe our Mishnah is not like Reb Shimon. What's Rabbi Yehuda's shita in that case? Rabbi Yehuda Omerim Lo Haisan Nevela Merev Shabbos Asura. Rabbi Yehuda is in line with our Mishnah that it's muksa. So says the Gemara, no, afilu tema Reb Shimon. We could even say that our Mishnah, which restricts one from moving an animal that dies, that it still works with Reb Shimon, who holds that you can cut up a nevela. How so? Says the Gemara, Mo de Reb Shimon b'ba'alei chaim. Reb Shimon agrees that when it comes to animals that are ba'alei chaim, and Rashi writes that here ba'alei chaim is a reference to animals that were totally healthy by shkia. So he agrees that in that case, shemei susha asurin. But what does he say? That if the animal was sick and died, so you kind of sort of anticipated that animal could have died, and therefore it's not muksa. Says the Gemara, that answer works according to some, but not according to all. Hani chalamar bara meimar mishmei de rava de amar moda hay Reb Shimon bebalechem shemei suashun shapir. According to those who agree with Reb Shimon's line of reasoning, that an animal that was during Shkia and it died on Yom Tov, so that we understand that shita. Ela lamar barei de Rav Yosef Mishmei de Rava Damar Chalukaya Reb Shimon Afilu B'Balechem Shemesu Mutarim Ma'ikal Meimar. That if Rav Meir was of the opinion that no animals are ever going to be usher, even ones that were healthy before Shkia, so then how do we align Reb Shimon with our Mishnah? Now we're back to the Gemara's initial question that Lema, maybe perhaps we should say that our Stam Mishnah is not like Reb Shimon, because according to those who understand Reb Shimon this way, that even if an animal is healthy, that he is not subject to any dine muksa, and it can be cut up after it dies. It can be cut up into pieces even on Yontif. Ma'ikal meimar. How then would we understand our Mishnah? So the Gemara answers, Tir Gamaziiri bebehemas kodshim. How could Reb Shimon fit with our Mishnah? Reb Shimon would say, our Mishnah makes sense that we would hold that a behema shemesa lo yizizanami makomam. That's true if an animal's kodshim. And dekanami, this actually plays out really nicely with the seifa of our Mishnah. If Rav Shimon's right, or the way that Zeiri is right, that the way we understand Rav Shimon is that the reason why we include, the reason why Rav Shimon could work in our Mishnah is because we're dealing with Kachim. It matches with the Seifa de Kanami, because what did we say in our Mishnah about the Chala? De Katani Alev al Chala Shenitmes. We spoke about Chala Shenitmes, Machala de Kedisha. Just like Chala is something that has Kedusha and can become Tameh. Af behema dikdisha, so that works out nicely. So says the Gemara, if that's true, elataima dikdisha, that the reason why it's muksa is because it's kadosh, but hadachul and sharia, that also poses its own question.
What's the question there? That if our Mishnah only says that animals that are kadosh are going to be muksa, but animals that are chulin are not, that works according to one opinion. That I could understand that even according to this shita of Rava, within the understanding of Mar Bered Rav Yosef Mishmei Rava, that this animal is going to even be mutter, that's fine. Then we understand everything. But if you say that our Mishnah is only talking about Kodshim, and that's what's going to be Aser, but Chulin is mutter, then what about the Shita that learns Rava that even Chulin is going to be Aser? That doesn't fit within our Mishnah, because our Mishnah is only Kodshim and not Chulin. Answers the Gemara, Hacha b'mayaskinan, when would we say that there's a case of Chulin that's going to be Aser? So then says the Gemara, that's b'misukenes v'divrei hakol. When an animal is sick, when will it be mutter? That's when an animal's misukenes. When we know the animal is about to die before Yantif, then we basically have in mind. We're at the last Mishnah, 8-9 lines before the end of the page, and what this will conclude, a nimnin al habehema lechatchila. You should not. We'll see what nimnin is in the Gemara, but basically, you should not go into a partnership for an animal on Yom Tov. The animal's $1,000. Everyone, all 10 of us are going to give $100. That's not allowed. Aval nimnin aleh me erev Yom Tov v'shochten u'mechalken beinehem. But you can do so on Erev Yom Tov, where you say before Yom Tov, we're buying a cow, $100 a person, $1,000, 10 people, all good. You can do the shechita then on Yom Tov, and then you can divvy it up accordingly. So my a nimnin. What does it mean that you're not allowed to be nimnin? So I kind of foreshadowed this a little bit. It's not appropriate to sit down and everyone agree to give a certain amount. That's not true for fundraising for tzedakah, which we're about to do, where we do raise money. That's mutter v'mutter, no problem. But here, it's not appropriate to do that on Yom Tov for everyone to say, I have a cow, it's $1,000, 10 people, $100 a person. Therefore, what should he do? So the way that we could use a little bit of a roundabout way to get to this conclusion. What should we do? Amar Rab, maybe shtei behemos. You have two animals that are very similar. They look like twins. Uma'amidin zo etzel zo, v'amar zo kizo. We look at them when we say, yeah, Betsy is like this animal. They look exactly the same. And then what do? Then you take one of them and you shecht it. And then after Yontif, you look at the other animal that was a match and say, how much was it? Let's divide by 10. And that way you're not doing it actually on the animal that you're shechting. You're waiting until after Yontif to do the math. Again, it's a little bit of a loophole, but the Gemara says that's fine with the Beitzah to match. 2 lines from the bottom, Tanya Nami Hachi. We're not allowed to give fixed amounts on Yontif. It's inappropriate. It's a little mekach umemkar. And even if it's not a formal Isser D'Rabbanan, it's certainly not appropriate. Aval, Omer lo hareini imach lemechsal shlishu v'leirvia. You are allowed to say I'm in for a percentage. So that was the case that the Gemara gave. We have 2 cows that look very similar. So everyone can say I'm in for a 10th. But I don't know what a 10th is yet. We'll assess animal number 2, which is the same as animal number 1, no problem. And with that, the Gemara concludes at the very end of the page that on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to be kovei a specific amount of money in regards to splitting the cost of an animal. You are, however, allowed to agree to percentages. We'll stop right here at the last words on the page. On Yom Tov, we'll learn one blot, Daf Kaf Ches, starting at the very top of Kaf Ches and going to the Mishnah at the bottom of Kaf Ches and Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful Yom Tov and a Piska Tava.